fire.
Oh yeah, you're so
He's gonna see it.
And check all your seats. That was just
But I don't know if you could if there's video. I think if you had your CD instructor, sure.
How about you?
good. Have a smile on your face.
Yeah, we have a
That was very marketing. And I need to go door knocking somewhere. Shut it out.
When I get out, I don't mind.
To go home.
Go home, find something.
There's always stuff in my district to do. There's always something It's challenging. But I have a good helper.
Since this one's not basic, we're just going
A good helper.
Welcome, everybody. It's a good turnout. We were hoping that we were going to get this good of a turnout, knowing it was kind of short notice. So, there you go. So, as you're aware, there's a REPC's changing, and changing. Effective. It has changed, but it still needs to change. Yeah, exactly. September 1st, as you know, that's when it'll be available to start using, and until January, come January 1st, it will no longer, the old one will no longer be available. So we are fortunate enough to have Sam Bell with SCB Legal, who is also our in-house legal counsel, here to oversee the class and do a 1-hour CE class. So there is a piece of paper that's going around. If you have not seen it, it'll come around, put your name and your license number on it so he can give you credit. But go ahead and turn it over to you. You can start.
Right, thank you.
Anyone not receive a copy of the REPC?
Everybody has it? We're going to go through it. Okay. Just warning you, it's our textbook. So we have a quote up here by Samuel Goldwyn. Who knows who he is? Does anybody know who it is? Well, you can't. We taught this yesterday. Matt doesn't count. He's the G in MGM. And does anybody know who Yogi Berra is?
Yes.
Oh yeah, this guy's like the Yogi Berra of the entertainment industry. Yogi Berra, big Red Sox fan. Anyway, let's talk about the REPC. So we have the REPC we use right now is more weighted towards the buyer or the seller. That's a question. Buyer. Yeah? We all agree? Anybody disagree? It's totally weighted toward the buyer, right? I think it's hilarious how weighted toward the buyer is. You know, because the buyer can cancel for due diligence. Why? Discuss, right? It says based on their inspection, they can cancel. If they don't like the smell that day, they can cancel as long as they're within the deadline. Very weighted toward the buyer. Financing condition. Cancel because they don't like the terms of the financing, right? There's no objective standard. It's all just how the buyer feels, right? And so it's definitely weighted more towards the buyer. I have the arrow there, and it's because I couldn't figure out how to make it go even further here. Right? But I think it's way over here. Has anybody had a chance before today to look at the new REPC? Have you read it? Yeah? You better see the transaction coordinator saying.
Have them raise their hands. I want to target.
Oh wait, raise your hands. You guys all know Matt Barton. He's your principal broker, so he's ultimately responsible for your mess ups. So he wants to single you out.
I know who to target, you know.
So for those of you who've read it, how do you feel it is? Is it still heavily weighted toward the buyer? You have a thumbs up at the back? What does a thumbs up mean?
Good.
You like it? Good.
I like the changes.
You like the changes?
For the most
How, do you think it moves the needle?
part. Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you think it go? Oh, look. That's my needle mover. I think it's a lot more balanced now. I think it's probably
Not quite.
not quite
About
center.
11:30, not quite scald.
Close. Right. It's a lot more balanced.
11:15.
11:50. Yeah, you're really pushing my limits of PowerPoint to do that, but it's a lot more balanced. We'll leave it there. Did anybody have any other general observations as they read through it? Something that just popped to their mind? They thought, hey, in general, the contract is more fill in the blank. It's a quiz. What?
It clarifies a lot of things that were kind of iffy.
It's more clear, right? Yeah, there are some things that clarify it. Today we're going to go through a bunch of the big substantive changes. If you look at the blue line version we handed out, there's a lot of blue, right? A lot of that blue just clarifies things, and we're not actually going to touch on it, but we're going to touch on the big heavy-duty things. Talk about what you should be thinking about as you're working with the new contract, working with clients, things you should be adding to addenda, stuff like that. Okay, Rob. There you go. Okay, next one. That's an old reference, right?
I love it.
I'll just beep every time.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, so here's some general concerns. As I read through this, I think they make some good clarifications. There's still some things that are lacking, so you know, the risk management team, me, Matt, Rob, Ken, we're all trying to work with the division to see if we can sneak a couple more changes in before they really launch this officially. So a couple of concerns. The first one, if you look on the first page, you have section 2.2. This is an addition, complete addition, and they've brought sale of the buyer's property as a condition into the actual REPC, so it's not by addendum anymore. So you have this option, right? We all know that when we see bold little bracketed things, we have to do something. We have to check is or is not. The concern is this. If you check is, it requires you to attach an addendum. Okay? So if you check is, attach the addendum. This is why it's a concern. When I read that, I immediately had some agents pop into my mind who I knew would check is but not attach the addendum. And I don't see any of them here today, or I'd single them out. I'm just kidding. I would never do that. Rick's one of them. So that gave me concern. Why did it make me concerned? In Utah, we're going to go to contract law for just a minute. In Utah, to have an enforceable contract, you have to have all of the material terms included in that contract. I was talking to some of the attorneys in my office who do a lot of litigation, and they go, yeah, material. As they looked at this, they go, whoa, material terms, this could be a problem. If an agent checks is but doesn't attach that addendum, we may not have an enforceable contract. So that's why it's a concern. We have this REPC. Rob and I were talking about it. As soon as this goes live, this brokerage will use it 6,000 plus times within 1 year. That's a lot of transactions. That's a lot of opportunity for a mistake, right? Ideally, this would be super ironclad and wouldn't allow for any types of mistakes. But if you check is and don't attach the addendum, it could be. And Matt's going to raise his hand and say something about if you're on the seller's side.
Very good, yes. So, you know, we've had this discussion more than a few times, and
Yes.
and I think when agents see this change in the REPC, they naturally gravitate towards, well, you know, that's kind of a buyer's agent responsibility. But it's really not, right? If it's material to the contract, you as a listing agent, under your fiduciary proper care, meaning knowing the contracts and how to help your clients successfully navigate them, if you're not alerting them to the fact that, oh, they checked is, but there was no addendum, you're shirking your responsibility, your fiduciary. You should know that that addendum should be there. So if you don't see it, you should be immediately calling the other agent. And I like Sam's advice from the other day, which is, please send over the rest of the offer.
Yeah. Just think of it in this way. If
We're not gonna
that's
respond
checked
to it until it's
is, and you don't have an addendum, it's like me sending you the first 4 pages of the 6-page REPC. you wouldn't present it to your seller, right? You would call up the other side and say, we're missing some pages. Send it over, then I'll present it. Same concept, okay, from the seller side. Yes, sir.
When it says you have to, it's subject to the sale of the buyer's property, that means the conditions of the buyer's property, you know, like when they're gonna have it sold by and stuff like that?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
the amount that they're trying to sell it for?
That's what's on the
anything like
Yeah, and so there's an addendum that, if you go to the MLS, there's an addendum that deals with that, right? If you're on the seller side, you're likely going to counter with the time clause, which would require them to remove the condition, but, so, if you check his, just make sure you grab that addendum. Yes?
So in 1.2, it says there are or are not additional items in personal property, and then it talks about a separate written agreement.
Yes.
So does the same
We're going to
thing
talk
apply
about
there?
that in just a
Leslie,
minute.
you're jumping ahead.
You're an excellent student. This is not AP yet. This is still 101. Over there. In just a minute. Okay.
Sam, one other.
What I just,
Hey, Sam.
it fell.
One other comment on that,
Yeah.
just real quick, is,
Okay.
even though we're poking holes in some of these things, the general concept is good, right? Because in the
Yeah.
past, people haven't declared whether they have a home to sell or not, right? Now, we're forcing the function. They have to affirmatively declare they do or they don't, which starts to lay the groundwork if they don't act honestly.
Yes, no, that's a very good point. I
Is
mean,
it a do or a don't
wow,
though?
everybody got
Because
excited with that.
can't we
Right.
still
So they
hide
say
under the finance?
there is or is not, right? On that particular
That's a
section, it
simple
says,
statement.
is there a house to be sold, to transact this deal, or do you or do you not? Is there or is there not?
Can't people still hide and just say it's not conditioned upon?
They would, but then
actually have a house?
now they've laid their own, they've given themselves the
They're
rope to
creating
hang
a
themselves.
fraudulent
Yes.
document at that
Yes,
point.
if you
That's
check is
true.
not, and you had to pull the equity out of that home to make the deal. Okay, we had a lot of hands go up. Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
All right, let's start at the back, we'll work our way up.
Just a little plug for the board. I just took an advanced forms class. I would recommend everybody to do that in addition to the REPC class, which we have to anyway. It's free for the rest of the year of the board. But it was amazing, all the addendums and all the addenda and all the different forms that we don't utilize. And in a class of 40 people that say, who uses this one? 2 people. I mean, it was really eye-opening, and so it's just a recommendation for everybody.
Great plug, y'all pay for those forms, you might as well know what they are so you can use them, right? Yes?
So again, this, I thought was put in there because sometimes people have to sell their home and it's not sold yet, but if it's already under contract, people will say it's not conditional on it because it's already under contract. So people need to know that they'll need to mark, yes, it's still, even though it's not closed.
Yeah.
And then the addendum doesn't even necessarily have a time clause in it, it just needs to have a specification, or clarification, I guess I should say, of this, it's under contract, it's expected to close on this particular date, but it doesn't have to be closed. The money's coming from
Yeah.
that.
No, it's true. This says that in order to get the loan and buy the house, you do or do not have to sell another house, right? And so if they do, you better check his. Even if it's under contract,
Even if it's under
Because
contract.
it's to obtain the loan.
unless you're the kind of agent that spends their commission before.
This was put into place because of the games that were being played before, where people were not putting anything at all, and they were relying upon the financing deadline to cancel at the last moment because the deal fell apart. And if you recall, whatever, 6-8 months ago, 10 months ago, when we brought this to the attention, saying if you're a seller, a way that you can counteract this problem is by asking the certain questions. Do they have a home to sell? If they did, or if we had a contingency beforehand, we had an addendum that was created that said, if you're removing this the subject to the sale clause, then the buyer is also required to provide notice from their lender that they can qualify for both loans. So we were trying to be proactive to correct the game that was playing.
Yeah.
This has already taken it once, now part of the contract.
More disclosure.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on to these next two. This is at the end of the buyer's due diligence, talking about the refund of earnest money, and this is at the end of the appraisal. condition talked about the refund of earnest money. Here, if we have a couple of sentences in red, this is how dorky attorneys are. We get really excited about things like this. You may all stare at me glassy-eyed and going, what? This is one we're trying to work on. What this says is that the earnest money is non-refundable unless you cancel for these two reasons, and gives two specific sections, and then says the same thing. Earnest money is non-refundable unless these two sections. What does that mean? As I read this, I say, as a buyer, what they've done is limited your opportunity to get a refund of earnest money to just 3 conditions. There are more than 3 conditions that we use that would allow a buyer to cancel and get a refund of their earnest money. So my concern is, why did they actually point out just 3 specific instances? What they probably ought to have said is, except as provided elsewhere in the REPC or something like that, the earnest money becomes non-refundable. That's something we're working with UAR right now on, trying to get that removed. Now, what does that mean? It means this. If you check, let's just go back to sales of buyer's property for just a moment. If you check is, and then you attach the addendum that says they can cancel and get their earnest money back, what you'd want to say is something along the lines of, regardless of 8.1c and 8.2b, buyer may get their earnest money back if they cancel under this condition. So you're aware, as a brokerage, we're putting together an addendum to address these things. So,
if for some reason
or you can scribble that notes.
they don't make any of the changes that are being submitted, we're going to have an addendum that'll be created by us that will protect us
And protect
for
our
these
clients.
concerns that are being brought up.
Yep.
So you want to change the state approved forms? Okay, cool.
Yes, it's fun, right?
You betcha.
The other day I asked myself, why do I do this to myself? Anyway, I think we have a good opportunity to help change before they become effective. So there you go.
Improve.
The concern there is just that they've limited the times when it becomes refundable, but there are more times that it should be refundable. You good? Can I go beep? Okay, here we go. Let's go to the top of the contract. You're going to notice some changes under earnest money deposit. Probably the most noticeable is that it's a lot shorter than it once was. There are fewer check boxes and nobody has to sign at the top now. Let's talk about the check boxes. Once upon a time, you could deposit the earnest money at acceptance or wait 4 days. Now the default is waiting 4 days, right? So you have, as agents, you have 4 days to gather the earnest money after acceptance, to gather the earnest money from your client. Those are calendar days. Once you receive that earnest money, the brokerage has to have it on deposit within 4 days. So yesterday when we talked about this, we did attorney math, which is not real math, right? Because in this case, 4 plus 4 does not always equal 8. Okay? If you receive the earnest money on the same day that they write the offer, and it's accepted, 4 plus 4 equals 4, because we already have the earnest money, right? We have the earnest money on the day of acceptance, which means the brokerage has got to get it into the trust account within 4 days. So that 4 plus 4 equals 4. If you get it 2 days after acceptance, 4 plus 4 equals 6, right? So it's, once you get that earnest money, get it to the brokerage so that they can put it in the trust account within 4 days of your receipt. And some of you are nodding and looking at me like, duh, Sam, I know that, but there are agents that we run into all the time, and if they were here, I'd point them out. But we run into them all the time that believe that it's really 8 days, and it's not. It's not. Yeah.
Just to be clear too, once we receive, write our client and say, well, don't catch that yet, right? I get paid, and make sure you're doing the math, because if you hand it to us, right, the company, that's when the 4-day clock starts ticking. It's not, oh, you get to use the remainder of the 3 days that you had plus our 4 days, so we won't be cashing it for 7. It's going to go in pretty quickly.
And the agent's part of the company, is what you're saying. That's what I'm saying. People are going, I didn't give it to the company, I have it in my own pocket.
Oh, so once the agents received that.
Who are you an agent for?
No, I'm just saying
Yeah.
that. But I hear people all the time do the opposite.
It's true. It's true. So just make sure you get it to us 4 days so we can take care of it. Okay, the next thing I've already mentioned, there's no more signature. You don't sign the earnest money receipt on the front page of the REPC. As an attorney, I read that and I thought, we have this requirement of the contract, which is we've got to receive earnest money and get it deposited. Once upon a time, they had us sign. I don't think it was the best method, but it was there. It was a method to document and have documentary proof that we'd actually received and done and taken care of the earnest money. Without that, this is going to be the new policy at Everest. One, you've got to use the confirmation of receipt of earnest money form. It's on the MLS website, right? I'm sure it'll make its way to .loop soon.
It's been.
It's already in .loop. There you go.
Been there for a year and a half.
For a year. So soon, meaning 18 months ago. It's there. Use one. If you're on the buyer's side, use it. And send it to the listing agent. As soon as it's filled out, signed, and completed, send it to the listing agent so that they have a piece of paper in their file that says earnest money's been received and deposited, everything's good, right? If we're on the listing side and they don't automatically send that to us, request it. Okay? Call up the listing agent. We need a copy of the confirmation of earnest money receipt or whatever they use. I know some brokerages have their own form and don't use the state form. Whatever they use to document they've received it and it's in trust, send that to us so that we also have it in our file. Okay? Any questions on that? Yes?
Yeah, actually, I'm involved in a couple of new builds with like Edge Homes.
Uh-huh.
They don't ever send me anything that's confirmation of earnest money. All they do is send us back the copy of the check. That's it, the front side of the check. What can I request from them? Because I'm not actually, because it's got to be deposited into their title company.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not getting that.
Have you ever tried to send the confirmation of earnest money receipt to the title company?
The one that we use here at C21?
No,
No,
whoever's
Edge
receiving
Homes.
the earnest money. If they're holding earnest money at their title company, like Provo Land or
Yeah.
someplace like that, then send a notice of confirmation of earnest money receipt to them and demand
That they fill it out and send it back.
And they'll even do that if they have received wired funds as well.
Thanks.
And they will be very accommodating because they are escrow agents that have their own set of rules.
And they'd love to have you close at their title company, so they're pretty
Yes.
accommodating.
Weird, huh? Any other questions on earnest money? Good? Okay, beep. Here we go. Inclusions. Let's go down to the next. It works really good. We all feel like we're back looking at the little film strips. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is inclusions. What we've got here is a picture of a TV mounted to the wall. We've actually got a bookcase mounted to the wall. Now let's think for a moment. Let's go back to real estate school and say, okay, when we're helping somebody sell something, what are we selling? We're selling real estate, which is real property plus, anyone? I heard it. Fixtures, right? And what are fixtures? Anything attached. So like that chair rail, right? We couldn't take that with us. It's got to stay. So once again, the dorky attorney in me for a long time has been asking the question, what about these TVs that people mount to the wall, right? Once upon a time, there were these massive cabinets. Remember, think about way back when, these big cabinets, a whole big piece of furniture, and then they went to just the tube with a little black plastic box around it, and then they got flat, and we started hanging them above our fireplaces. Well, that's attaching it to the wall, right? And I've wondered for a long time, in fact, I had to answer the question a couple of times on insurance claims for clients, because they said, well, that was part of the property, and no, the insurance company said, no, it's personal property. So we don't cover that as part of this policy. So we've kind of fought this on other fronts. The division has seen fit to finally help dorky attorneys like me out. So if you look here, they have added installed TV mounting brackets to the inclusion. Okay, next button. Yeah, just hit it again. So what does that mean? So we hang it over our fireplace. Can you see the shadowed part where the TV was? What's going to be left behind is this big bracket. So when your buyer walks into the house that was staged so nicely with that 800-inch TV mounted, 15 feet high above the fireplace, all they're gonna see is that monstrous bracket, okay? Now, who's bought a TV bracket lately? Anybody? Matt has. They're expensive. Some of these brackets cost as much as the old versions of our TVs, right?
The old versions.
They're expensive. Some of them are very specific to the TV. They do make universal ones, but the universal ones only fit certain sizes and shapes and things like that. Something to consider. If your client has bought a big fancy custom TV and they have this great mounting system that was expensive and they don't want it to go with the house, you're going to need to list it in the exclusions in the MLS, right? You're going to need to make sure it makes it into the exclusions in the REPC. For on the listing side, that means by counteroffer, right? We're going to have to do it in a counteroffer because that piece stays. Now, just a word. If you are on the buyer side and you get a counteroffer that says the TV mounting bracket is excluded, you should start thinking, what kind of mess is going to be left behind, right? How big is that hole going to be? Some of these are heavy. They've used big, thick mounting hardware in the walls, right? Do you want the seller to repair that? Bring it back, paint with paint to match, things like that. Just some of the things to think about on both sides of the transaction, okay? Yeah, let's hit solar panels real fast. They've included solar panels. How many of you are familiar with how solar panels are bought and or leased? Right? What if your client has solar panels that they don't own, that they have rented? Whose solar panels are those?
Vivint's.
Oh, okay, fine, Vivint's or whoever. It's the solar companies. What happens now? I'm actually legitimately asking. I don't know.
They have a lease.
There's a lease.
To be up on your
Does
roof,
that
and that's
follow through?
Ownership.
Right? Here's what I would recommend. If you're walking into a house, and so buyer side, let's go buyer side, we'll go seller side. Buyer side, you're walking into a house, you see the solar panels on the roof. You need to be asking questions of the seller. Like, are those purchased or leased? And if they're leased, bring it back to come back to your broker and let's have a discussion about how are we going to handle this, right? Are we going to get an assignment? What is this going to look like? Justin?
On those, just make sure you're asking, how long's the lease?
Yep.
How much is it to buy it out?
Yep.
And what is there a transfer fee? Because all those costs may be either passed to the buyer or the cost to have it completely removed off of the structure. But the problem there is roof leaks.
Yep.
So just be aware that now once they've written the offer, if they have to remove the roof, you have to write in there that any changes in removing that will be subject to the buyer's evaluation as opposed to it's back on the seller.
Yep. But ask those questions, right? Can we buy out the lease? How much is that going to cost? And if your client really wants them, maybe we're shifting that and the seller's got to take that into account of the fact they've got to use closing proceeds to buy those solar panels for the buyer.
So at the beginning of this paragraph, there's conspicuous 2 words or 3 words, right? If presently owned.
Yeah,
right?
you're asking a question somebody asked yesterday.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you look at some of the additions, solar panels, it's a great question we just talked about. Water softeners, a lot of them are rented, right? Security systems. And, we've had a couple instances. I had one recently where the client, he didn't own the panels. He had a purchase agreement, but he did not own them. This was his take. So they removed the panels.
It says owned and in place.
Owned
Right.
and in place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if it's not owned but it's in place, what's the...
It's a
What is
conditional,
it?
it's an and, it's not an or. You
Yeah,
have to have
true.
both of those conditions met, they must be.
It's a discussion we need to have with our clients to avoid
That's
these
the whole
issues,
point,
right?
Right.
Because if we can solve that issue up front, if we can have the discussion, understand what we're dealing with solar panels or if
Water
people
softeners.
rent water softeners, I didn't know that was possible.
Yeah.
Maybe they rent their in-wall speakers, which are now included as well.
Propane tanks.
What?
Propane tanks.
Propane tanks. We can have those discussions up front, then we can plan for them throughout the transaction and avoid the questions afterwards. People do call and say, hey, that was owned and in place when it actually wasn't. Matt has a great example of this from the other day. You want to share it? You want me to share it? The washer and dryer?
Oh, yeah. So, an agent representing a seller, contract came through, on the MLS, it was listed as the washer and dryer and refrigerator were excluded. Of course, the contract came through with what? The check boxes included. The agent didn't see it.
Agents buying some washer and dryer.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing
Why
is
is there wrinkles?
that there were tenants in this investment property.
The
They're the
tenants
ones that
own
own the washer and
washer.
dryer. So going back to the previous statement, if presently owned and in place, and so he had an out. However, this is one of those cases of you can win but lose. If he would have stuck to his guns and said, well, I'm going to win, then the deal unravels and he really loses. So what did he do? Come on, what did he do? Bought a washer and dryer, so the deal would close. So he lost a little but won.
Which incidentally isn't the first time we've had this problem. Happens every quarter or so. So have those conversations up front. Make sure they're either excluded or addressed in the transaction, right? Let's go to another one. This one, okay, can you guys tell what that is? The monocle? What's in the monocle?
Yes.
Zoom in. There we go. The Nest, right? So a Nest, it's a thermostat. It's wired into your HVAC. It's mounted to the wall. It is a fixture, right? It is not, it is part of the deal. This is what we've found. Some, they're not cheap, right? They're really cool. You can work with them with your phone and set up schedules. It's really great, but they're not cheap. Some sellers want to take them with them. Now, if your buyer walks through and writes an offer and that is mounted to the wall, whose Nest is that after the thing closed? The buyer's, right? So if they go through final walkthrough and that's not there, the seller's going to have a problem. So one of two things. The seller either needs to make sure that these type of smart home gadgets that they want to take with them are either excluded, or before you really list, as they're staging the home, have them pull that off and put whatever they're going to put up there instead. So the buyer has no expectation that they're going to get a monocle with a thermostat in it. It's cute. It's cute.
Yeah.
It is cute.
It's gonna be more of a thing.
It's going to be a wink. It's just going to be a big hole there. It's going to be creepy is what it's going to be. It's going from cute to creepy. Okay, and then one more thing before we leave inclusions. Right here on 1.2, under the blank lines, you can see they've added a sentence. And in that sentence are more check boxes, are not. Okay? This is going to our AP level question that was just asked a few minutes ago. Because it talks about if you check are, then you have to have a separate written agreement at closing. Okay? What does that mean? There is no form for this separate written agreement, which means you've got to call someone who's licensed to practice law to write it up, or you have your own clients write it up. Okay? Yes?
There is a form.
They're doing a form for personal property? I'm going to give you a good pointer here, though. Always check are not. Okay? Always check are not, and then on the lines above, check other, and fill in the blanks. If the blanks aren't big enough, write C addendum, whatever, one or two. And then we just avoid that whole other contract. And then we don't have to care if there's a form. But there's a form. I'm glad you went to the class.
Lenders don't like that. They sometimes make you exclude everything off of the contract.
Okay? And if they're going to do that, then we'll use the other form. Okay? But we want to eliminate as many extraneous contracts and agreements as possible to make it very easy and in one place. Okay, next one. Oh, this one's fun. Special assessments. Let's go to the second page. We're going to talk about 4.2 and 4.3. We're going to start with 4.2. And if you look at that, there's only There's only 2 words in an acronym that they've added to 4.2, but let me tell you why it's important. It says, any special assessments for capital improvements as approved by the homeowners association. Who loves HOAs? Relevant HOAs, right? Here's the concern. Special assessments as approved by the HOA. Okay? Let's think about paragraph 7 for a minute. We've got due diligence. So the seller's supposed to hand us over the most recent HOA minutes and the most recent HOA financials. Here's how a lot of HOAs operate, and I'll just use this story. It's one that we encountered personally, not because I was the attorney that helped them with it. So there's the high-rise condo. This one happens to be in the mouth of Emigration Canyon, and it's older, and their entire plumbing system starts to fail. 14-story building, all the boilers, all the chillers, all the pipes. Okay? They need $1.8 million special assessment. What does that mean? You take $1.8 million, you divide it by the number of people who have to pay into it, it's about $60,000 a unit. Okay? It's a chunk of change. But the board was very benevolent and nice. And they thought, hey, some of our owners can afford a $60,000 hit. Some of them cannot. Let's vote on it and approve it. And then let's give them several months before we assess it so that they can figure out how they're going to pay this, right? So in like June, they approve the special assessment. But they're not going to actually assess it until, sorry, it was in September. I got my dates back. September they approve it. They're not going to assess it until June. That's a long time. Guess what happens during that, 10 months? They sell some condos. New owners move in. There's one guy, he buys in December, moves in January, he's down in the fitness center and just happy as a little clam with his new great condo with a great view. And somebody says, hey, how do you feel about that special assessment that's coming up in June? And he goes, what special assessment? Oh, the $60,000 one. This guy had spent all his disposable cash to try to get this condo. He does not have $60,000. He had no idea. Why didn't he have any idea? Because he bought in December, which means the most recent HOA minutes were December and November, not September when it was approved, right? Then he gets the financials. It's not on the financials. Why not? Because it doesn't get assessed until June, when it would actually show up on the financials. There is a gap. What you're going to find with a lot of HOAs is there is always a gap between approval and actual assessment of that special assessment. So as I read this, I say, how does that impact us? Well, we should be asking questions. We should be having our clients ask questions of the seller. And these are the questions right here. Okay. Number 1, have any special assessments been approved? Okay, we have 2 sources that we're going to ask these questions. 1, we're going to ask the seller. 2, we're going to ask the HOA contact. There's more questions. Okay. We're going to ask the seller, we're going to ask the HOA contact. How are we going to figure out the HOA contact? Seller's disclosures, right? And by the way, they're supposed to tell us if there's assessments on the seller's disclosures. A lot of sellers aren't that tuned in to their HOA. So we're going to ask both sources. We're going to say, have any special assessments been approved? When are they due? How much? Okay? If we ask, that triggers their duty to tell us truthfully. Okay? The next thing, if we go down to 4.3, it talks about, C talks about HOA other entity fees due upon change of ownership. That's known as a transfer fee or a reinvestment fee. Okay? Has anybody encountered that? Yes? Has anybody encountered the daybreak version of that? I heard a laugh, like a painful, guffaw. It's expensive, right? They can be quite expensive. Do the next one. So these reinvestment fees, under state law, if your HOA is smaller than 500 homes or 500 acres, they cannot exceed half of 1%. On a $300,000 home, that means $1,500. That could be a big hit to a buyer who's just getting into that $300,000 home. In a place like Daybreak, there's like Traverse Mountain, I think Suncrest, other places like that that are big and have more than 500 homes, there's no limit. Some of them are 1%. That's another big chunk of change the buyer has to come up with. Well, if we can figure out what those are, we can allocate them between seller, buyer, or split, right? Those are the check boxes we have. Now I realize you may not know those before you fill out the offer. You may just be looking at what's on the MLS and checking a box. The default, if you're a buyer, is going to be seller, right? I want the seller to take care of those. Then we can go through due diligence and try to figure out what it really looks like and if we need to renegotiate. Those are the new changes to special assessments and how we ought to deal with them. Any questions?
Can I just say,
Fire.
also ask, is there any pending litigation?
Pending litigation, that's another big one. The lenders care, they ask, and in some cases, they won't lend if there's pending litigation, especially construction defects.
Yeah, specifically that's a mistake.
Yeah. Good point. Okay, the next piece is we've introduced some new terms in the REPC. Click one more time. We have long-term lease or rental agreements, and we have what are called short-term rental bookings. What's the difference? Short-term rental bookings look like this. It looks like you can log on to one of these two places and go on vacation. The difference is it 30 days or more or 30 days or less? If it's 30 days or more, it's a long-term lease or rental agreement. If it's less than 30 days, it's a short-term rental booking. We see these concepts come up in 3 different sections, 6.1, 7, which is the seller's disclosures, and 12, which say you can make changes to it, right? 6.1 says that you take, as a buyer, you're going to take that property subject to these things, okay? So let's go on to the next one. Let's go to section 7 real fast and see what kind of disclosures have to be given. So section 7F, very similar to what we have now, except for they made it apply only to long-term lease and rentals. What does 7F say? It says that the seller has to give copies of any unexpired long-term, so 30-day or more leases to the buyer. Okay? The next one, 7G, talks about short-term rental bookings. And it says that you have to give the short-term rental booking schedule as of the seller disclosure deadline for guest use of the property after closing. What does that look like? If anybody's used VRBO, you can go down to this calendar section, you can see what days it's open and what days it's rented, right? I look at that and go, we're handing over a calendar, right? Saying, okay, rented for Labor Day weekend, rented for UEA, rented for, the whole month of August, okay? What's missing from 7G is the rental agreements for that. If I'm a buyer, I'm going to want to know, how much am I going to make per night? Right? I don't just want to know what nights I can't use it. I'm going to want to know, hey, did the rental agreement encourage frat parties? Is keggers encouraged, right? I don't want that. I want, no pets. I want, old people who only drive to church and back in their Buicks. I don't want that stuff, right? So, as on the buyer's side, if they're buying something and you find out it's subject to short-term rental bookings, we have to ask for the rental agreements. If it's long-term, they just have to provide. If it's short-term, we have to ask, okay?
Point out, where he's addressing section 12 as well. Now, section 12, it's talking about changes of the contract. In the old agreement, it just specifically said once the contract was accepted, no changes could occur. Well, was it 12.5 or something like that?
12.5.
It says that on short-term bookings, those short-term bookings can still be made up until the seller's disclosure deadline. So that's a minor change that you need to be aware of as well, that changes of the contract about bookings, short-term bookings, can occur until your seller disclosure deadline.
On
Yeah.
section 6.1B, where it says 30 consecutive days,
Yep.
so wait, after 30 days, your calendar is void, correct?
So that's talking about what a short-term rental booking is, and so that's anything less, where someone's renting the property for less than 30 consecutive days.
So you could have something booked for a year or two out, and you're accepting that.
And you're accepting, that's a great point, right? So if you have a buyer who's wanting to buy, I thought, like, where is this really going to be applicable? It kind of could be anywhere, right? But we all know the resort communities and places. I think of it in terms of like a cabin, right? So if you have a client that's like, hey, this is my big move, I'm moving from the city to mountain living, and you get a short-term booking schedule, they need to look at it very closely, because what if it's booked out all the way through the summer of 2018? Means they can't just move in and live there for that, or if it's for just their personal play place for their family, and they don't want others coming there.
So they can
Just
book it
something-
themselves over Christmas, and the people have to leave and then move back in.
There you
So
go.
booked it yourself.
Yes, exactly,
For $1.
for $1.
In the next 10 years.
So just some food for thought. We can thank probably these two companies for making
If
it.
that is an issue, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I can see this being an issue. So a booking comes up and people, as far as the disclosure, if you didn't receive anything, then you'd say that wasn't presented during the essentially closing the property, therefore you have to take it up with the past owner, correct?
Yeah,
I would assume,
yes.
because they,
By the property, taking it subject to
them providing the documentation.
them providing the documentation. So you may have a claim against the old owner, where I would go to the seller and say, well, looks like you're paying for the penthouse suite at the Grand America. All these guys are in my house over Christmas. Because we can't live anywhere other than that. Right? So. It's good, right? Should go big. Go big or go home. Okay. So one other thing they've added, which I think is interesting, it's in 7, it's also in 12, is property management agreements. So in the seller's disclosures, if you have a property, or your seller has a property that's being rented and it's being managed by a property manager, you have to now provide a copy of that property management agreement to the buyer. 12 says you can't make changes to a copy of that property management agreement after it goes under contract. I don't know why that's even in there, to be quite frank. Property management agreement is an agency agreement, right? Does anybody in here do property management? But that was a test, you all passed. Matt was ready to take names. Property managers, if you're managing a portfolio, have to be licensed sales agents or brokers, right? So that is an agency agreement between the landlord and the person managing the property. It does not transfer when the property is sold. The buyer does not have to use that property manager, so I don't know why they put it in there, to be quite frank. I have asked the question, and the answer was, well, people might like to know. To which I want to respond, well, maybe they want to know the landscaper, or maybe they want, I don't know, if they want to know, they can ask. But anyway, it's in there, it's going to be mandatory, be aware of it. If you're selling income properties, you need to hand over the property management agreements. Do you have something to say? You're good?
Are we still in section 7?
We're moving on right now. Beep. Here we go. Seller's disclosure. So we're staying in section 7. Did you want to say stuff?
Nope, I'll wait.
You'll wait.
I'll wait to
Okay.
point number 3.
Very good. Okay, lead-based paint. So while we're in 7, there's a new B. We have to disclose lead-based paint. Shocker. We already had to do that. But now it's there. We've already talked about the rentals and the property management agreement. We have to provide evidence of any water rights or water shares. Is that where you want to step in? No? Still no? Okay. We're good. We'll move on.
Yesterday.
I know, he did yesterday. So you have to provide evidence of those. The next one, this is interesting. Written notice of any claims or conditions known to seller relating to environmental problems and building or zoning code violations. Does anybody have a sense for what they're looking for there? Okay, you do. Good news, your principal broke it down.
Non-compliance issues.
Yeah, non-compliance issues, things like that. We actually currently in our office are working with a buyer who got their house red tagged because the seller built the whole house without a permit. What's weird is the buyer's already been in the house for a year. So you may go, well, what's going to happen? We have lots of defenses. Don't worry. I'm not worried about the buyer. But I read this and say, well, does that mean the seller has to say, hey, by the way, I didn't pull a permit. I have no certificate of occupancy. There could be a zoning code violation.
Or only part of the house, like the
Or only
basement.
part of the house, like the basement. We live in Utah. We don't like to pull permits for basement remodels or basement finishing. And a lot of us like to do them ourselves because I know how to nail 2x4s together and I know not to touch the white wire to the black wire, right? I've got a friend who loves to dabble in electrician's work. He is not an electrician, but he has done things like pulled whole new services to his house. He has put in whole electrical panels without ever pulling permits, right? So this puts a burden on the seller to send over. Now this is, to send over zoning code violations. The
So
last
your friend, would they say, I may have a building code violation?
No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't, and I don't think he does. He is actually an electrical engineer, so I think he knows exactly what he's doing.
I guess my.
That becomes very subjective, right?
Yeah, my
He
question
should be
becomes-
disclosing, but you're saying he wouldn't.
My question is what am I having if somebody's remodeling a property, fixing and selling a property, the disclosures?
So the seller's disclosures don't ask that question on,
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is written notice, right?
Yeah.
Because
written
I'm
notice.
just saying if the seller's disclosure, that's my point,
Right.
is seller's disclosures don't ask it.
which
This
this
is
says
saying
they should.
written notice,
Or conditions.
right?
This says written notice, so the seller will provide written notice of any claims and/or conditions known to seller relating to environmental problems and/or building or zoning code violations. So they have to know that, it's like the seller's disclosure. Do you know that there's a building code violation? No, but I remodeled my basement, so I suspect there's a building code violation, but they don't know until they're notified by the city. I mean,
It's
you want the lawyer version of
gray
this?
area where if somebody's aggressive and they've got access to legal help and they want a way to come back at you, I see an opening.
Because it says
Yeah.
conditions, you had a
That's the
condition,
thing, that's,
you knew you didn't get a permit,
You didn't get a permit, so that,
so this
Could be a
condition,
violation.
maybe it's no, it may be right.
so if you're representing a
But I won't
buyer,
tell
you
you.
should probably be emailing them specifically on this, were permits pulled
Hold
or
on your
not,
basement.
yeah.
right, per section 7J,
Yes.
were permits
Should be a
pulled or
common
not.
question to ask.
It should be a common question to
Right.
ask.
And if you're representing, obviously, the seller, don't ask.
Hire a wordsmith.
Hire the wordsmith to write the
You
notice.
got all this done? Great, don't tell me anymore.
We're not saying that they were not
Great.
pulled.
We're not saying they weren't not pulled.
We're not pulled, yeah.
Holy moly.
Question, doesn't a building inspection, would that help identify violations in the procedure?
So that's a good question. For those of you who didn't hear, would an inspection help identify the violations? Don't ask me about home inspectors.
don't require a license.
Sometimes,
Right.
but there are lots of home inspectors that will just point out things that you could yourself point out, like there's cracks in the foundation and the roof is old. But there are good ones that could maybe dig in. It may not be thorough.
They wouldn't know if permits.
They're not gonna-
They wouldn't,
they're not
they
gonna-
wouldn't know if permits were
Right.
pulled,
They're
but
not gonna
they,
do that.
if they're really sharp, they may be able to look and go, well, the electrical
right.
panel is right next to the shower. That's a problem, right? But not everybody, not all the inspectors are that sharp.
Tell us how you really.
That may be a problem.
In all fairness, though,
I
if we
may have
represent
done
the
that
seller,
myself.
don't we want the seller to protect themselves by declaring in the seller's disclosures that that they remodeled the basement without pulling permits? I mean, wouldn't that protect the seller? Because they've disclosed it. Now, if the buyer buys it, now it's the buyer's
Yes.
legal responsibility because they were informed that permits were not pulled.
Yes.
So
Yes.
wouldn't that be how I would protect my seller? Okay.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of that, disclose, hey, I've done this, but like leaks, right? Well, it did leak, I've seen this before, well, yeah, it did leak, but we fixed it, so I don't know of any current leaks. And I'm a big fan of, yeah, it leaked, we fixed it. Let the buyers ask questions. Likely won't kill the deal if it was actually fixed, so.
Is it an issue at all with the lender?
With the lender,
If the permits
if the
are-
permits
The
weren't
lender doesn't
pulled,
see the disclosures.
yeah, the lender doesn't see the seller's disclosures. So I don't, it may be, if they know about it.
There's something where they are asking for the seller disclosures.
Well, the times where we've,
I apologize, I don't remember, we've had it 3 times.
the times when we've had issues with it is when an addendum is being written and they say, we want the seller to repair items 1, 2, and 3 as per the inspection.
The
And
inspection
so
report.
the lenders are then asking for a copy of the inspection
Inspection, I
report
wanna
because
see
that's
the
part of the contract. So that's where you're going to be making the big problem. They're not asking for the seller's disclosures, but yes, they were asking for the inspection report, which is going to disclose everything.
Moral of the story is declare the items you want repaired and don't
Do not
add the
reference,
inspection
do not
report.
reference to the set.
All right.
So, let's say we need cracks in the foundation finished, right? You would literally write that, we want the cracks in the foundation, resurfaced or filled or whatever the case may be. You wouldn't say, I want those fixed as per the inspection report, because that's gonna be a flag to the underwriter. The underwriter may very well ask for the report, and they're gonna say, well, wait, there were all these other issues too, now we don't wanna lend.
Then what's your loan diet, because you said crack in the foundation?
There you go, moral of the story. All right, the last piece is FERPTA, Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Act. Anybody run into FERPTA issues before? Yes? Okay, this is it when you're dealing with sellers who are not citizens or resident aliens, right? What it says, this is the IRS helping make sure they get what's due to them, is that if the seller is a foreign person, then the buyer has to withhold 10% and pay it to the IRS on their behalf. So the IRS gets to tax the sale of that property. Okay? Is that the one you wanted?
And that's the one.
That's the last one.
So I was just musing over here, I was reading the last sentence. In order to avoid closing delays, if seller is a foreign person under the FERPTA, seller shall advise buyer in writing and.
Oh, it didn't finish.
Wait, where? What?
Last sentence of K.
Oh, no. Okay, so that's and other, and then you can specify. Let's just go down the list.
It's
We're
terrible.
coming to the defense of the draft. It's terrible.
It's not supposed to.
What I was going to add is a little more
K's
information
a
about
separate
that.
item from L.
It is a.
So this is a real scenario. It was 6 months ago, we had one of our buyers receive a letter from the IRS stating that they owed $25,000 because of the home that they purchased, the seller did not pay the tax that was owed. And so the IRS was going after the buyer. Well, it turns out, after our investigation, the money was collected by the title company, and so we were able to show that it was done. The buyer loved us for everything we were doing. But that's what this is pertaining to. So it's an important question that whether we're representing the buyer or the seller, we need to find out that information so it's not going to come back to us. If we are representing the seller, make sure we're asking the question and have them check the box. If we're representing the buyer, make sure that we know the information, because if they are a foreign investor, that we know how that seller can then be contacted. We have a forwarding address. We have some way of, they're supposed to supply it in the paperwork now. But those are questions that you might want to just ask to protect your clients.
So, if it's a foreign person who lives in the house, it doesn't apply, right?
If it's a citizen?
I don't know. Well,
Or
No,
No, if they're foreign,
They're
they're selling.
foreign, but they're in the
If it's
US.
talking about the foreign seller,
So it's the seller.
seller of the home that happens to be a foreign entity or a foreign individual, they're not a citizen, and exactly what the tax code is going to have to identify what that is considered to be as a foreigner.
Well, my question is though, if they live in the house, are they a foreign investor?
Who owns the
The
house?
investor doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's
Whoever owns the house, who's
it's
untitled.
whoever owns the house. If they are not.
I know, but whoever owns the house, if they live in the house.
It's only when they go to sell the
Only when they
property.
go
No, the question is, they're not the landlord, that's actually, they live there, right?
Right.
If they still have to disclose.
So are you saying that if there's a foreign entity involved in the sale of the house, that the buyer is responsible to pay the taxes?
They're responsible to withhold from.
Can be.
They can, yeah, there's,
If they don't.
there's a
collect
huge
themselves.
diagram we could write up here of if.
Okay, so
no,
basically,
but-
if during the settlement proceeding, they must withhold the money that the foreign entity would owe.
Yes, well, 10% of the sale, of the value of the
Attaches
home.
to the house?
If they don't get it from the seller. This is, the IRS is gonna get their money. They're gonna, of course, wanna get it from the seller when that transaction closes. But if it wasn't ever disclosed that they are a foreign entity, they're gonna come back and make the buyer pay for it. They're gonna try to get it from the seller first, if that's the information they have to get it. But they're gonna get their money.
Buyer has a duty to
In
withhold.
other words, they're trying to rip off the buyer if they can.
They're gonna get their money.
They're not
It's
trying
the
to.
buyer, the buyer is responsible to do it.
Yes.
So people don't realize the buyer is responsible.
The buyer is responsible to withhold, yes.
If they don't, then they still come in.
The title companies have the forms to deal with this. We just have to know that it needs to be dealt with.
So if the seller doesn't disclose that,
So they have to declare yes or
how
no.
can the buyer be responsible? Because they
They
never.
buy it.
How do you even know if they are
That's-
citizen
Well,
or
the IRS doesn't care.
Still gonna-
How do
Yeah.
you find out?
The IRS doesn't care.
The IRS doesn't care.
Can I muddy the waters just a little
No.
further?
Your job is to help these
There's a
people a lot of
broker
money.
down in Utah County that is teaching some courses right
Oh.
now to get foreign nationals to put the houses in an LLC. So they become owners of the LLC. So it's a layer of obfuscation, so you can't, it's even harder to detect, right? And there are ways they can do it properly, but my guess is
As long as that LLC is a Utah LLC.
the law still applies, they still owe the tax. So if you're going to be selling or purchasing from an LLC, you might want to get a copy of articles of incorporation or things like that to verify who they are, and then verify you're not going to put your buyer subject to this tax, and potentially withhold at closing that 10%.
But the way I read it, when I did that, is the buyer's responsibility is to get them to sign saying they are not a foreign person.
Correct.
Yes.
And if there's any suspicion, you need to get a forwarding address for them. But at that point, the buyer is off the hook.
Yes.
So that's
Supposed to
Yeah,
be.
there's a, it's a,
Well, haven't
what's it,
seen
the waiver?
it, but-
I haven't, no,
No, but I'm just saying that's what it was. That's the only out. So that's why we have the form,
Yes,
because it protects everybody.
exactly.
correct.
That's a form.
Everybody signs it whether they're a foreign person or not.
It's true. It's in that big stack that you give the title company, they're signing your life away, they're like, here, 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 you're like, okay, I don't know, whatever.
So
Okay,
this is the fourth place that you're signing that you're not a foreign person.
exactly.
You're aware.
Yep. All right, so, we're right out of time. We're gonna go real quick through the financing conditions. So if you go to 8.3, they've made changes to the financing condition. One of the biggest changes that they've made, well, let's just go through the timeline real fast, because as I read this, I go, okay, this is a timeline about earnest money and when it's refundable, right? So in boy, this is crazy, 8.3BI, right? This addresses cancellation between the due diligence deadline and the financing and appraisal deadline. Okay? What you're going to notice is there is a new blank with a $ sign. This means that we can make partial earnest money go hard. Okay? And during that timeline, from buyer's due diligence to finance and appraisal deadlines, that number is how much is non-refundable to the buyer, how much stays with the seller. Okay, and the rest comes back to the buyer. Somebody the other day said, well, it's a hot market, so if you're not putting 100%, then you're not going to get the deal. And this has been written and will probably be around for many, many years. Hot markets, cold markets, all the markets in between, right? So, as I look at that, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to write 0. Because if I write 0, then it's the same friendliness to my buyer that the current contract is. They cancel, they get their money back, right? The seller's going to want it to be 100%. As we look at this and thought about it, I think we're going to see a lot of counter offers on that, where the buyer puts a number that's lower than the seller wants and the seller counters with the higher number, right? The nice thing about that is it does make the buyer has skin in the game. They're not just going to, well, I don't know, depends on how much they put at risk, but likely won't just cancel for the fun of it during finance, after due diligence has expired. The next piece comes at the bottom of that, of II, and then III. Or baby Roman 2 and baby Roman 3. This takes care of the timeline from financing and appraisal through settlement. Okay? And in little baby 2, and Roman numeral 2, or II, it says that the buyer shall not be obligated to purchase the property if financing falls through after the finance and appraisal deadline. Okay? To me, this is a big deal. I've had a lot of calls where sellers have said, we want to force the buyer to buy. We know financing fell through, financing appraisal deadline's over, they can't cancel. We're looking at section 16, and it says I have 3 options: specific performance, keep the earnest money, return and sue for damages. I want to force them to buy, and my universal response is, how are they going to buy it? Let's just ask for a trip to the moon. It's not happening, right? But then they'll always say, great, we'll turn the earnest money, we want to sue for damages, but we think we've been damaged in $100,000 because we lost out on all these other offers and it was on the market all summer, blah, 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 So this just says, hey, the buyer can do that. The next, the III, or baby Roman numeral 3, says if they cancel because financing falls through after the finance appraisal deadline, the seller keeps the earnest money. So they've answered those questions for us. Okay? Any questions on that?
So Sam, how does that dovetail with section 16 then, that has the 3 remedies?
Yeah, section 16. So under the rules of contract construction, specific provisions trump general provisions. 16 is a general remedies provision. This is a specific provision to a very specific scenario, which is finance appraisal expired, bank won't fund, buyer cancels, gets out, seller keeps the earnest money, the end.
So it overrules 16?
It overrules 16.
So when would 16 apply for specific performance?
Any other defaults? Any other defaults you could...
They seem to be like almost mutually exclusive, right, on the financing.
There, yeah, that piece is...
In other words, we need to get higher earnest money.
Yep.
You need to get what?
Higher earnest money.
Yes!
Higher earnest money.
Right?
Because these $500 things...
Isn't that crazy? $500.
That's the most you're going to get back,
Yeah.
no matter what, even if it costs you forever, because you can't sue for more than that.
Do they still have the second remedy in section 16? Or is it just saying all you're getting is earnest money?
Oh, if the buyer defaults? Well, if the buyer defaults, it's earnest money, right? If the seller defaults, the buyer gets a return of their earnest money plus a match from the seller.
Right, but the second remedy, right, in section 16 is specific performance, and the third one is other damages.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So could you still go after them for other damages, not for specific performance?
Not at that, well,
Or is this really...
excluding the
or-
finance and finance issue that we just talked about, then yes. But in this case, no. The seller couldn't go, I was damaged and I want $50,000.
So assuming we have that buyer with $500 earnest money, probably the safest way to cancel would be cancel on financing. Because the most they could go after would be earnest money. The way this is structured.
The way this is structured. Yep. Any questions? Okay. There it
You have to
is.
think like a criminal to know what
You have to
to do.
think like a criminal. All right, did everybody sign in?
Yes.
Okay, if you didn't sign in, it's somewhere.
Prayer.
And if you signed in, we'll make sure it gets banked. It's in our report. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Sam.
Hey, congratulations on your new baby.
Thank you so
Is he
much.
wonderful?
It's been fun. To me, it's been a good balance. The family's well-behaved, healthy.
Thank you.
Big brother's been good.
So good to
Been
see
good, yeah.
you.
Where's Russell? What's left? I don't know.
No, I'm gonna turn this thing off. If I do, I'm like, hey, Rick?
Yeah.
Do you know how to stop this so it doesn't screw up the recording?
Yeah.
Yes, I did, and I got voicemail. I'll get it.
I just deleted it.
Several times. Well, the one number you gave me only had 9 digits, not 12.
Thank you. So the question, you
The
have
first one
comment, maybe
was
I misunderstood.
incomplete, it only had 3 digits for the last.
There's other
Not
ways,
4.
is what I thought you said.
there was one.
So somebody doesn't do
I'm sure, but the first one you gave me only had 9 digits. But the other one you gave me, I just didn't have so much several times.
We're
It wasn't
doing
anybody
it
very
where they actually
generic.
so if you want to have, just have them show the rest of your team.
In other words, it was full of.
That is called and.
So they're going, well, issues that are there. Bottom line is, you said there's a way.
Open up, and they're trying to fix issues.